we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not. Hi there, and welcome to Better Than Not, the podcast that aims to capture shifting perspectives and thought-provoking ideas in conversation, which is based loosely on my series, A Changing Frame of Reference, which you can read on the Substack app, and I hope you will. Hope you'll subscribe, as it might give you some insight into what this podcast is all about. I'm your host, Doug Gardam, and today I'm excited, thrilled, and it's a privilege to welcome Jake Gold to the podcast. Jake, how are you?
Nice to see you, Doug. I'm doing fantastic.
Well, that's kind of cool to get us started. Just to kind of introduce Jake, if you don't know Jake already, Jake is the founder, president, and CEO of the Management Trust Company, which his company.
Co-founder with Alan Gregg.
Oh,
Alan
cool. With Alan Gregg. So there you go. But he's been a manager for like going on 40 plus years. So he's seen a lot, which you'll find out. Many of you will know him from his participation as a judge on Canadian Idol. But I think most of you will know him in connection with his management of the iconic Canadian group, the Tragically Hip. He has many clients over the years. He's worked with people like Sass Jordan. He's worked with The Watchmen. He's worked with Adam Cohen. I even found out that he worked years ago with Rush's producer, Terry Brown. So you have had an awful lot of background in the entertainment world, Jake.
That would be an understatement, Doug.
So to get started, like, how does I'll say a young kid from New Jersey come to Canada and found or get involved with the entertainment world like you have?
Well, first of all, I didn't have a choice in coming here because I was 2 when
Okay.
when my parents chose to. My dad was originally from Toronto.
Oh,
My
really? Okay.
mom was from Manhattan.
Ah,
They,
okay.
they met in Florida, in Miami, in like 56, early 57.
Okay.
And my dad followed my mom back to New York. And they got married a year later, so I was born. And then we lived in New Jersey for a bit. Then we moved to Manhattan. My brother was born, and then the family decided in 1960 to come to Canada because that's where my father had his support systems. His parents were here, and
Sure.
Toronto and everything else. So that's how I ended up here.
Oh, okay.
Getting into the music industry, music was always a big part of my life. Went to, the first concert I ever saw was in 64 when I saw the Beatles at Maple Leaf Gardens.
You went to that show.
Yeah, I don't remember much of it. I was 6 and it was a lot of screaming. Like they didn't have real PAs back then, but
Oh, wow.
the first concert I can remember was, I think I was 12.
Okay.
And I was supposed to see Sly and the Family Stone, and Sly canceled, which apparently back then he did a lot of. And they would just replace it with other acts. Like, it was just, whatever. It was like almost like a festival vibe, which if this band doesn't show up, some other band will show up, And it was
Wow. Okay.
Delaney and Bonnie and Friends and Grand Funk Railroad.
Grand
And,
Funk Railroad. Wow.
and
Okay.
I had no idea at the time. I knew a song from Delaney and Bonnie and Friends, but I had no idea that Eric Clapton was actually the guitar player in
Oh,
Delaney and Bonnie.
man.
And so years later, it's like, oh, Eric, I tell people I saw the show. Well, Eric Clapton was the guitar player. Oh, I saw Eric Clapton, when I was 12. So,
Amazing.
yeah, so music was always a big part of my life.
Did you play?
No, I sang in bands. I
Okay.
used to sing in bands in high school. little bit just out of high school, and then I had been on the road with some bands that were friends of mine, where I was doing lighting and tour
Oh, really?
management and stuff like that. And then I moved to LA in '79 for a couple of years, and I worked in the theater as technical director, and I worked for a lighting company.
Oh,
And,
wow. Okay.
and then I ended up moving back, and a friend of mine had a band. They were called Hot Tip. They were called the Numbers, but they were forced to change their name. They asked me to be their tour manager, lighting guy, and so I would go to all the
Wow.
meetings with the agents and everything. And then they ended up breaking up because the singer didn't want to tour,
Oh,
and so they got a new guitar. He was the singer guitar player. They ended up getting a new guitar player. Different people, the keyboard player and the bass player took over the singing. My childhood friend, his name is Coleman York. He was the drummer, and they approached me and they said, "We want you to be our manager." And this
wow.
was in like spring of '81, like basically around this time, maybe a little later, 1981. And I remember saying, "Well, I don't know anything about it." And Coleman said, "Don't worry, you'll be good."
No
And I,
way.
yeah, and I went, and I'm still friends with Coleman to this day. Like I actually socialized with him and his wife, and we hang out. And and I
That's
said,
cool.
"Okay, I wasn't doing anything else," so I said, "Sure, why not that?" And
And that's
and
where it started.
and I've been doing it ever since. So we're like 45 years in, you know. Yeah.
That's kind of crazy. So did you tour with them, or did you kind of ground yourself and start looking for other acts, or how did the whole thing kind of start for
Oh,
you?
so they were just a new band. So, I had to go out there and look for gigs for them and
Oh, man.
try and, get them into the studio and try and get record companies interested. Cause back then you could kind of do stuff independently, but you had to have a lot of money because,
Right.
you had to go into a real studio to make a record,
Yes.
like you had to be able to, it was only vinyl. Um,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
it wasn't even CDs yet. Like CDs were not a thing, right? So it was
Yeah.
cassettes and
That's
vinyl.
right. Yeah.
So no one really did it independently. So there had to be a record label. And so you would make demos, you would maybe get enough money, scrape enough money together to go into the studio for 2, 3 days to record 2, 3 songs. And then you'd go around and
Wow.
play them for record company people and try and get gigs and try and build an audience. And so you were doing all of that stuff. And, it was just trial and error, like learn as you go kind of thing. Um,
You can't replace that though. Like that's something that like is just a very real experience, right? Like going through that, like you said, going out and booking, scheduling events for the guys to play at. Like that's a pretty grueling, shall we say, experience, is it not? At the same time, exciting.
yeah, I mean, the thing is, I didn't know what I didn't know, you know. So I would hang out at the agents' offices and just like look for scraps, Hey, you got a gig for my band? Got a gig for my band? Oh, last minute cancellation. Can your band play tomorrow? Yeah, we can play. And it was like just like hanging out and
Oh
just
man.
making relationships, like
Yes,
at the end of the day, Doug, and you know this as well as anybody,
absolutely.
we're all in the relationship business, and our relationships are only as great as how we nurture them. And I
Did,
think more often than not, people forget that, and that goes for any business. And I think I was really good at that. And I think that's what my friend saw in me, that he
okay.
knew I could go out there and meet people, and I wasn't afraid to get on the phone with somebody, and I wasn't afraid to like walk into an office
Oh yeah.
cold, like, and I was fearless because I didn't know any better, So,
There,
um,
there's something special about that, and I dare say naivete, but it's like you say, you don't know what you don't know, and it allows you to go and do stuff that once you do know, then it starts to change.
right, yeah, yeah, yeah. So in some ways, it's actually, when you don't know the rules, you don't know if you're breaking them, right?
Right on, right on. Yeah.
I think breaking rules is a big part of rock and roll. So it's kind of
Oh,
like,
it's the whole deal, right?
yeah. So, and I learned over time how to break rules. Like I didn't do it at the beginning. It's funny because a friend of mine who was a really successful manager came before me, still around. He was being honored at one of the industry events, and he tells the story about when he first started, how he used to hang out at the agents' offices and just look for gigs for his bands and stuff like that. And
And
I'm hearing him talking. I'm like, I did the same thing. Like I did the exact same. And I remember coming up to him afterwards. I said, his name's Bernie Finkelstein, really famous
oh yeah,
guy.
yeah.
And I said, Bernie, I said the same thing. I did exactly what you did. I just hung out and hustled. And he goes, yeah, that's how you do it. It's kind of how you do it. You know, there was no one told me to do it. I just instinctively thought, well, the gigs are where the agents are. They're the ones booking the gigs. They're the
Yeah.
ones in contact with all the clubs. So you might as well go there. Like go
So
where
you
it is,
so you were like, this is one of the things I talk about quite a bit is you were like, the expression I use is boots on the ground. Like you weren't
Yeah.
doing this from like an office in some tower. You were literally right
No,
down in the ground digging in the trenches.
in the early years, I was living in my mother's apartment. You know, I moved back from
Wow.
LA and I was in my bedroom and I just had a phone. You remember, we didn't have email. We didn't have
That's
fax. We
right.
didn't even have fax machines, right? Like
Oh,
telex was the communication tool for anything long distance. So everything was over the phone, and I would just pick up the phone or in person. You know, I'd
yep.
show up,
Yeah. Like
and that was way up at Bathurst and Steeles, and all the agents were downtown, and I would just like get on the subway and get off and walk
unbelievable story.
walk in from meeting to meeting and meeting to meeting, and and so it all started there, and then over time I would met one guy, and I started working with him, and then that didn't work out, and then I met Alan Gregg
Okay.
in like late 85, and I was going to help him with a project that he was trying to shop around of a young
Right.
guy that he had been investing in over the years. And we just hit it off, and we decided in January of 86 to like form a partnership and start a company. So that's where the management trust came out of, that
Okay.
name. But I had already been a manager for about 5 years before I started with him. And then
So was Alan very involved with the band world, entertainment world as well? Because kind of later he came political into the
no,
political
no,
world, didn't he?
he was a pollster then.
Oh, he was. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and people know him from politics, but he used to tell me that politics was his entree, but like it was only 10% of his business. It was mostly
Oh,
corporate clients who wanted research. You know,
interesting.
corporations did research. It was mostly marketing research. It was, it's public opinion polls. So, you're asking people, you're doing focus groups, you're asking people about a product, and then you're assigning numerology to their answers, and then you do an analysis. And that's where Alan was really good. He was really good at strategy and analysis. So,
So
uh,
he would have been a pioneer in that world because to me that information today is just like we live on it almost. It's like we feed on it, like marketing companies with
yeah.
AI and all the stuff they're talking about today.
Well, interestingly enough, he started a Substack recently, and he's actually doing his own podcast with another politics guy,
Oh,
and
cool.
and he's talking about the early years of being a pollster and how it all started, and how when he first started, there wasn't
No.
even a company in Canada doing it. They all were buying their research from American companies, so he was kind of one of the first people to do it. But yeah, so we met in late 85. We formed a partnership in early 86. And then a friend of his sent him a cassette tape in August of 86.
Ah,
And that tape was a tape of this band from Kingston, Ontario called the Tragically Hit.
that's how
That
you first heard about them.
Yeah, that whole story is told in the documentary that
Yes,
we
yes.
we put out, No Dress Rehearsal,
Yep.
that we put out, came out in September on Amazon Prime. Obviously, it's still up there, so anybody who's listening who hasn't
Y-
seen it can
uh,
watch it. But
for sure.
the whole story is told there on how that came about and how we went and saw them, and everything
Well,
else.
I just found like that documentary is kind of what's even prompted this, but it's very interesting hearing the background and how some that kind of happens.
Hmm.
because I remember even when like I was in school at that time and or just coming out of school, and a friend of mine had seen them. I think it would have been Larry's Hideaway.
Well,
And
Larry's Hideaway was the night that we saw them. They don't.
okay,
They never played Larry's Hideaway again after that night.
so I might be getting my stories mixed up, Jake.
Hmm. Well, they played the Hotel Isabella.
Okay,
After that, we did a series of almost what are they, residencies, where we played
right.
one month for a bunch of months in a row.
Wow, you're
Right.
ahead of your time on that one too.
Yeah, yeah. And then
So,
we would bring people out to see them. You
so
know,
did you immediately like them when you heard that cassette tape?
when we heard the cassette, we both had the same reaction, which was, "Wow, this is really interesting. This guy's got a really interesting voice. We need to see them live."
Ah, okay,
So a
okay.
week later, we set up a gig to see them at Larry's Hideaway.
Wow. Did they send you the tape?
No, it came from a friend of Alan's in Kingston that he knew in
Really?
the political world. And
Because
this guy's brother-in-law was friends with the guys in the band.
okay, okay.
So, the brother-in-law says, "Hey, do you know anybody in the music business?" "Yeah, my friend Alan, he's got a thing going in the business." "Oh, you should hear my friend's band," and gave him the cassette. The cassette got to us. So
Yeah, well, it's kind of weird, Jake, because I'd like to come back to this, but I'm I didn't come to the Tragically Hip until late, and I almost feel
there's
like they
always
were.
room on, there's always room on the bandwagon, though, Doug.
Oh
There's
my
never
goodness,
there's never late, right?
no, it's for sure because they like. I like to kind of say they were a band that really kind of got the connection. I call it syncopation, where
Mhm,
the word poetry that the late Gordon Downey would write
mhm.
wasn't like your normal harmonized music that you listen to that matched kind of the song, but it like as far as like the melody and the lyrics go hand in hand, they were already kind of mixing those up or syncopate. Like I like to use the word syncopating them. And that's why I said like I didn't like the genius of that in some of theirs. Like they got the song for Anne of Green Gables rework, renaming, right? Or the
Well,
re one that
that was Ahead by a Century, yeah,
yes. And
which was
that's
just
a
which was just used this year. Well, in August of last year, it was part of Umbrella Academy.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, they used it in fact, for episode like Anne of Green Gables, where it opened the show. It was the opening
yes. Yeah,
credits.
yeah.
Academy. There was six episodes in the final season of Umbrella Academy, and it opened episode 5.
Oh wow.
And
Okay, well
and, and they used the whole song as his opening sequence for
oh
the
my goodness.
episode.
So I gotta watch that because it started to like and I was gonna say fully completely was my favorite. And
Hmm.
again it started to wear like the music and how it fit together. But then years later was 50 Missions Cap
Right.
and how
From the
it
same
started.
album, which is from the same album.
Yes. And
Right.
it's like they like you're on they're on a whole nother level to me. That was the part that I started to recognize, right? And so
Well,
now it
you being a writer, right?
yes, yeah.
And that may be also, if you don't mind me saying so, part of your evolution as a writer, because you were a writer, but you weren't a published writer
Yeah,
until
that's right.
later in life. And maybe your the way you looked at things, because you're a published writer, started to be different than how you looked at things prior to be a published writer.
No question, Jake. I mean, it's so interesting that you catch that right away because like it just started to shift how I even looked at things, right? Like it's
Of course, because you have a different lens now.
and
It's the
it was
same,
just so go ahead.
well, it's the same for me when I'm listening to music. Um, um, you know, there's music I listened to prior to becoming a manager and being in the business that I
Okay.
just listened to listen to. And then there
Okay.
are music I listen to that I listen to from a critical eye. because of being in the business.
Right.
And there are times where I find myself listening to the stuff I grew up on that I love that I still put on today.
Okay.
And, and I start to have a new appreciation for, because
Yes.
now I'm listening also with that critical ear or critical eye, you know?
It
And then some of it, I'll say to myself, what was I thinking? You know? It's like, yeah, it gave me joy at one point, but would I like it today? Knowing what I know. So
well,
there's
when you said you
all,
saw the Beatles in '64,
yeah,
I started to think a little bit about Led Zeppelin.
how old I am,
No, no, no. It was just like because I kind of missed Led Zeppelin as well. And then years later, exactly with how you're saying, your ear seems to shift. And
right,
I heard those chords from Kashmir.
right.
And I'm going, how did I miss this stuff?
See, I was a Led Zeppelin fan on Led Zeppelin 1.
Oh my goodness. See, so
Yeah,
you were there. You were
I,
there.
I was 13 and we were listening to Led Zeppelin. I think that was
Yep.
70, 71, right? So, oh yeah, no, Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 for me were like, they were on repeat all the time. I was a kid.
And to
So,
me, that's kind of what started to happen and still is with the Tragically Hip's music. Like
right.
it just feeds on you. Like when you hear some of the different sounds, it like the background music grows on you, and then this lyric comes in. Like I said, 50 Mission Caps and a brilliant lyric to me. Like just brilliant.
Yeah,
And
and a lot of people don't realize like that it's a lot deeper than just this story about Bill Barilko,
oh
right?
yes.
Right?
And then expressions like I keep it tucked up under my baseball cap that I tuck the brim around. Like you could just picture like how you used to like tuck the brim so it
Mhm,
would bend and curve. And it's
mhm.
like, man, there's way more here than what I thought. So
Which isn't even cool anymore. Like everyone wears
true
them
enough.
flat out,
That's
right?
right.
So nobody bends the front, you know. Oh,
The life changes, that's for sure.
yeah.
So at this point in time, are you now expanding your world with like when I say this, you've seen the hip, you signed them on to work with them. Were you starting to work with other bands and or other musical talent at this time, or were you still with your original friend as well and managed that band?
No, well, I actually had managed was managing some other bands
Okay.
before I heard the hip. I was still managing these other. My friend's band had broken up,
Oh,
but
it
I
had. Okay.
had
Okay.
a band that I managed called New Regime, which had a record. They were the first band I got a record deal for, and they were signed to RCA. And and then I managed some cover bands because that would help pay the bills. And that was basically get them gigs and help promote them and market them. And they were just bands that were playing all the time that would help
Oh
pay the
wow.
bills because you had to, bring
Yep.
in
Yep.
revenue. Yeah. And
So
again, phones, to be on the phone all the time was expensive, and office space. You had to have office space, and you had to have, I remember in '86 when Alan and I first set up the business, like we bought a fax machine, and a fax machine then was like $2,500. That was a lot
oh
of money,
crazy.
right? And so, and you had to put a phone system in, and you had to get, business lines from Bell, and they were expensive. Like it was not cheap to run an office. It's way cheaper today to run an office than it was back then.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's
You know?
there's no question about it. So do you remember how you felt when you got that first record deal?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting you ask those questions. I've never been one to rest on my laurels.
Right.
I don't even, I would be like, yeah, got the deal. Okay, now what? It was always like, okay, time to now make the record. Like, who's going to
Yes.
make, like, even to this day, I probably should smell the roses a little bit more, but,
Ah, okay. Okay.
I'm just like always thinking, what's next? Like, what are we doing next? What are we doing next?
Well,
Um,
that's probably why you're successful and you've been the longevity you have in the business, right? Because it's not an easy business. by any stretch, right?
No, I always joke that outside of the time I was on Canadian Idol, the only paycheck I've ever received is the one I wrote myself,
Right.
and when you have staff and you have office and you have everything else, you got to pay yourself last. So there were plenty of moments where I was like borrowing from, a friend just to pay the phone bill or to, pay the gas bill or whatever it was to pay the credit card off. And, like you do that and you pay them
So,
back, obviously, but
right.
now they call it bootstrapping, now that's an expression. Oh, you bootstrapped your company. It's like, well, I don't think there was a term for it then. I
No,
think
you
just,
just did it.
yeah, you just did it.
We're
So,
kind of in a world now we've got to name everything rather than just doing the thing. But
right,
it's
like
like,
a new business is a startup, and it's like a
yes,
start. Like, isn't every business a startup? Like the whole thing is just like, it's like you
it
got to
is.
refer to it as what it is. And I was like, just go to work, like if you're gonna be an entrepreneur, you know, you better love what you're doing, because if you don't, you're gonna hate it pretty fast,
Yes, yes.
So
So do you have a sense, like you said you're not smelling the roses, but do you have a sense of what drives that in you? Like you get the record deal, but you pick the phone up to make the next phone call, right? Kind of thing. That's how what's the next thing we're gonna do?
mhm.
What do you think is that like? Did you get that from your mom or dad? Like, is that just something that came
Well,
about?
I don't know. I think I got that from I once read a stat that said, 70 to 80% of entrepreneurs are driven by the fear of failure.
Ah, right.
So, that
That
we can unpack a whole day of it, Doug, with you and my therapist, right? But um, you
so
know,
you-
uh, I think that I've gotten better over the years at, like, sort of celebrating victories,
cool.
right?
Yeah.
But there you cannot be an entrepreneur and just sort of sit back.
No, no,
It's not what you do.
no.
And it's never been in me to do
To do.
that. Like, people would say, "Oh, you're so successful. You must be really happy about all this stuff you've done and everything else." I said, "I'm more excited about the next thing I'm going to do."
No.
Like,
Yes.
I have like plaques on the walls of all these different achievements and sales achievements, gold records, diamond records, all of that other stuff. And in my office, and I tell people, yeah, that's not for me. That's for other people when they come over and they have a meeting with me. So it's like, it's impressive to them. But for me, it's sort of what I already did,
Right.
and
Next.
but it's the same thing on the negative stuff. I don't dwell on it because I can't change it. So
Right.
I
It's
don't,
done.
yeah. So I kind of, one of my expressions is I don't have a rear view mirror,
Ah, okay. Okay. Yes.
right? I'm
Yeah.
always looking that way, not that way. So,
You are one of a person in your description that lives a lot in the present, like trying to get what you're going to go and get next, what's happening now and what we're doing next, rather than looking backwards to say, "Oh, look at all the great stuff I did."
well, that's all we got, right? You know,
It is, but
I
it
mean,
doesn't seem that everybody lives that way.
yeah, but I think it would be better if everybody did.
Oh,
And
yes.
it's idealistic, but when you think about it, and it sounds very philosophical, but when you think about it, we invented time. We
We
invented
did.
keeping track of time, right?
Yep.
That's a human invention. It didn't exist before we invented it, right?
Yep.
We went from the sun and breaking that up into constraints of hours and minutes and seconds, but
Yep.
it never really existed. So if you live in the moment, then the time
Yeah.
doesn't really matter,
No.
right?
No.
Because we're
Exactly.
making history as we're talking,
Yep.
right? You
No
know, and,
question.
and so I kind of look at everything. Yeah, am I planning ahead and am I planning forward? And that's part of my job, is to make plans. I'm making plans now for 18 months, 2 and 3 years from now,
Yep.
on things that I'm doing with my clients. Um, but I'm getting them done now. It's like
Right.
I'm living it that way. And when it comes, and then something else will be planned down the way.
And
Right.
you as an entrepreneur, Jake, you do sound like it's a plan, but it shifts as it comes into play. Like, and you have to shift with it, right?
Yeah. You have to be fluid. You have to
That's
be fluid. We last year was the HIP's 40th anniversary, and
wow.
we rolled out a ton of stuff, right? Including the doc and a coffee table book and, all this other kind of stuff. And, we planned that 2 years before. Like, we had this long-term plan of everything we
Right.
were going to do over the year, starting in February, right? All the way through till Christmas time. Like, we had this
Amazing.
whole rollout, and then we got lucky on a couple of things, right? Like, a couple of things just fell into place.
Funny,
And
it's funny how that happens.
right. But I like to say that luck is knowing when to seize opportunity.
Ah,
And
yes.
so when certain things came into place, we're like, okay, well, we know this is going to happen when this happens.
Okay. Yes.
How are we going to take advantage of that? How are we going to, plan taking off from that? What are we going to
Yep.
do to make sure we get the
Wow.
most out of that opportunity? Right.
And that's
So
never ending.
no, but you always, if you don't have your eye out for it and you're not
Yes.
paying attention, it can go past you and it becomes a missed opportunity.
Right on. Right on.
So
So
that's kind of my thing, right? I tried to explain that to my girlfriend, um, when I go to like events,
yes.
whether it's
Yep.
like someone's business anniversary or whatever. I tried to explain that. I said, when I walk into a room like that, um, I'm just looking for opportunity in the room. I'm
Yes.
looking at,
Right
I
on.
say, and it's not an ulterior motive.
No,
I say,
it's
because everybody's there for the same thing.
yeah.
People go to these events to make new relationships and perhaps create opportunities,
Yep.
right?
Right on.
Like, and so I always tell her, I said, when I go into these rooms, when I go to some event, no matter what it is, to you, it may look like a party. To me, it looks like an opportunity
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and a plethora of opportunities, because that's how entrepreneurs think, right?
No, for sure. It's very interesting that you describe it that way because you see those things happening. Who I should be talking to. That looks like something that we could watch up of what we're working on or whatever that is. And it's really interesting because I was going to ask you, but before I get there, when you're looking, you said something to me years ago about what you look for in talent,
Hmm.
and it was like people get to the point that they can't do anything else
Yeah.
or
Well, I
something.
as I know what I said is um, that real artists, in my mind, and this is
Right.
just my opinion, but I think most people who have done it as long as me will agree. Um, Real artists create because they have to.
Right.
Okay, they have
Yes.
to.
Yep.
It's innate in them, right? And they're most likely unemployable.
That's what you said. That's the word was they're most likely unemployable. And it's
Right.
so
And I'm the same way. Like, I don't think I could have a job. I don't think I could work for somebody and go into a place at 9 a.m. and punch a clock, and that I just don't see myself ever being able to do that. I tried it,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
In fact, I did work when I was first starting out managing. I did work for a stereo store,
Oh,
and
okay.
I called in sick one day. This was November '81, and because my band got a last minute gig in London, Ontario, at the Spoken Inn at Western, and it was a Thursday, and I remember coming in on the Friday. I remember the day, it was November 29th,
Oh, wow.
1981, And the boss called. It was like a chain of stereo stores. One of the bosses that owned it called me. He says, "Where were you yesterday?" And I said, "I was sick." And he said, "No, you weren't." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. My band got a last minute gig and I had to go do the gig." And he went, "You're fired."
Yeah.
And I, okay. And that was the last time I ever worked for somebody.
Wow. And you
And
remember that like it was yesterday.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember being on the phone. I was in the store and he called the store. And I
Amazing.
hung up the phone and walked out the door and never looked back.
Look back.
And
No.
and and fast forward a few years, mid to late 90s, he was now in like the printer and copier business selling, and I needed a new printer, and my brother was still friends with him. My brother said, "Oh, you should call this guy and if you need a new printer." And so I called him up and he says, "Only if you come and meet me." And by then we were having all the success with the
Yes.
hip. We were touring all over the world and selling out arenas everywhere. And I had to go to his office to pick up this printer because he needed an audience with me, like, and I was sitting in his office. I was sitting in his office and I said, "I never got a chance to thank you." And he said, because obviously he didn't remember any of it, right?
Right.
And
Oh wow.
I recounted the story to him and I said, "So thank you for firing me because it really told me that I should never work for anybody like you again." And he laughed about it. And then he said, "Let's go have lunch." And he had 300 employees. He had a big company. And we went into his lunchroom. They had like this big giant lunchroom with cafeteria and everything. And and he stood on the table and he was kind of this guy and he announced to everyone eating lunch, "Do you see this guy here?" And he's pointing to me. "Well, he does this. And I fired him in
No
1981."
way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I fired him 19, and look what happened since.
Now
And
that's cool. That's
I,
cool recognition.
but I couldn't tell if he was basically telling all his employees, "If I ever fire you, don't worry, you could end up like this guy," or you know. I couldn't figure out. I think he was doing it to try and be like, "I knew this guy used to work for me." Like, I'm not sure
Yes.
if that's. I couldn't figure out what he was doing, but it was kind of embarrassing, and I couldn't wait to get the printer and get out of there. But but I did thank him. I did thank him for firing me.
Now
So
that it's kind of neat when you can go back in history and kind of almost correct those situations that at times they seem wrong, but they actually turn out to be very right
yeah.
in that case. So all this is going on. How does this Canadian Idol thing come to you?
So there was a time where I wasn't managing the Tragically Hip, and
Yes.
in 2003 we split. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from an agent friend of mine, and they were reaching out to agents who knew people in the business, whether it be artists or managers or whatever. They were looking for people to audition to play judges on the show. And
Oh
he called
wow.
and he said, "Is this something you'd be interested in?" And it was literally 2 weeks after the Hip and I split, so it was like late January
Oh
2003. And I
wow.
and I was like, I'm not sure. I don't know if I want to do that. And I remember going home to my now ex-wife, and I said, "Yeah, they want me to have a meeting with them about this television show, and I don't know." And I didn't see it as sort of my thing,
Right.
uh, and she said, "You should go meet them. You'll be good at it." You know, I,
Yeah.
I think you would do well on the show. And it was like another person telling me you'll be good, you
Right
know?
on. Yeah.
So, so, so I went and had a meeting. And a funny story too, because I have this meeting. I know the people because they had produced a lot of music television stuff. They had produced the Junos over the years, so I knew them.
Okay. Yep.
I didn't know these particular producers, but I knew the guy who owned the company, and I knew the company. And we have a meeting, and they're talking to me, and then I'm like, then they say, "Hey, do you want to hear some singers?" And I'm like, All right. So they take me downstairs to a basement, and they have a studio set up. They got cameras, and
Oh,
which
wow.
which obviously they had always intended for me to do this, but they didn't tell
Right.
me coming in that I was going to be auditioning that way, like on camera,
Okay. Right.
right? Which was smart of them because it was more like, sure, let's go do it, as
Yep.
opposed to me having to think about it, right?
Right on. Right on.
So, so I sit down at the desk and they put a person on either side of me and they said, okay, you're going to, here's some notes, which turned out to be the same kind of notes we had on the show, which was like the name of the person and where they were from and, what songs they were going to sing. Right.
Cool.
And then it was up to you to kind of engage with them and talk
Right.
to them and then let them sing and then give your opinion. Like that's basically was the job. Right. So, um, so different people are coming in and everything, and there's this one girl comes in and she's like Susie from Saskatoon or something, and I'm like, oh, I have some friends in Saskatoon. Have you ever been to this place? You ever? And I'm getting this sort of blank stare from her. Then it dawns on me that she's not Susie from Saskatoon. She's acting as Susie from Saskatoon,
Ah.
right? And then
Yeah.
they told me after they had hired musical theater people to
Ah,
play the
okay.
roles. Like one would purposely sing bad because they wanted to see how I would react to someone singing bad. Someone would sing really good, and they
Yep.
were just actors that could sing, playing the roles of various different people.
But you
From
didn't know this.
no, 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 no. I just thought it was Susie from Saskatoon.
That's pretty cool.
Right. So I did my thing. I was walking out, and the camera guy who was at the back of the room near the exit door says to me, hey, have you done this before? And I said, no, never did it before ever. And he goes, oh, you're the best guy we've had here. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And
Yeah.
and then I left, and then they called, and then they wanted to do a next audition where they had 6 of us. So they were now down to 6. And we
Yep.
didn't know if we were going to do 4 or 3 because the American show had 3. So we assumed they were always going to do 3.
Right.
But what I didn't know is the UK show and the Australian show, which were the only other ones that came before the American show, had 4 judges.
Oh, okay.
And and then from the 6 of us, they picked 4, and I was one of the 4. So I just was going along for it. And then they told us right before the Junos that year, because we actually ran late. They didn't tell us until like late March. And in like 10 days later, we're on an airplane to Vancouver to start.
Really?
Yeah, the next year we started auditions in late January because we already had the cast and we could do it way more in
Right.
advance. But that year we started late just because the show wasn't being cast until late and everything else. But
Yeah, so it makes sense.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of how it happened.
So during that time, did you see any talent that you would qualify as someone that you would take on?
There were a couple. There were a
Yeah?
couple. Yeah. So, we did 6 seasons. So we saw a lot of singers.
Oh
And
my goodness, yeah.
a lot of them were just really good karaoke singers.
Right.
There was a lot of them that ended up going into musical theater and having some real success. Like super talented people, but not necessarily writers, people
Right.
that would create.
Yeah.
Um, and actors. Some of them went in to have really good acting careers. To this day, musical theater, acting, and then there were some artists who were really good. Unfortunately, the best ones, if they made the top 10, uh, the show,
Right.
which was owned by us, the show had first dibs on them, whatever the record deal was.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, of
And
course.
and any other manager, and they had, the show had its own management division, which was the Idol franchise, right? so they could pick up any of those 10. We weren't allowed to talk to any of them for 90 days.
Oh, really? Okay.
So
So,
even if they didn't get picked up, we couldn't, none of the judges could talk to them for 90 days. So if I wanted to manage one of them that I thought could be really something and they didn't get picked up by the show,
yep.
the chances of me getting in there before somebody else was pretty slim.
Yeah.
So while there was some really talented people, I actually was never given the opportunity to
Okay.
work with
Okay.
any of them. I did work with one of the ones who I thought was really good that didn't make it past the top 20. I worked with him, Oliver, for a while, but he wanted to do a duet thing with his brother, and I wasn't really fond of that, so
Right.
we agreed to disagree. But Carly Rae Jepsen came out of Idol,
I was gonna say that that's the one that I remember. Like,
and
and
also one of the bigger stars. Unfortunately, he's had some really bad behavior that's caused him, like he's in
yes,
jail, which is
that's
Jacob
yeah,
Hobart was super talented.
yep. Well, he
Again,
toured a lot.
oh no, Headley was a big band. They had
Yeah.
multi-platinum records and they toured arenas and they got really big. And
Right.
he was actually quite savvy.
Really, eh?
How to Yeah, because he had the name Headley even then. He was wearing Headley t-shirts in the show and like he had an agenda.
Really
His agenda was like, I'm here to promote my band. I'll get as far as I want to get, and then I'm going to self-sabotage and promote my band. You know?
interesting.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
he knew even then. That's
yeah. No, we knew it too. He had an agenda. Like
okay.
this thing was all about how can I take this to, build my own career out of this,
Well, and
right?
there's that entrepreneurial spirit, right?
Yeah, except his behavior, I would say, didn't necessarily act in his favor. Now he's in jail for sexual
Yeah.
assault.
No, that's I was gonna say it's funny that because that just faded because that's a few years ago now, right?
Yeah, yeah. And although apparently more recently he did have an appeal or something. I'm not sure. I mean,
Okay.
don't pay much attention to it anymore.
No,
But, but
that's
we
crazy.
we
But
saw
Carly Rae Jepsen.
Yeah, Carly Rae has had probably the biggest success out of any, and she didn't win.
No, that's the
The
crazy part
most,
about it.
in fact, the most successful people from the show didn't win.
Interesting, eh?
Yeah, and
What
that's
does
not
that tell you?
well, it's not unusual because unfortunately the kind of deals they had in place were very
Ah,
restrictive,
okay.
right?
Yep.
So they would sign you for the world, but you're only out of Canada, and the show would be the promotion for you, but at the same time, um, um, you know, uh, uh, the U.S. they didn't care because they had their own idol thing,
That's right. That's right.
right? And because the show was the big promotion, our show wasn't seen in the US. So how are they going to promote some artist that
Yeah.
no one ever heard of, right? And the
Yep.
same
Yep.
in the UK. So you're signed to the world to this record deal, but you have no access to the world. So the deals are very restrictive, and they also would take your merchandise and and because you didn't write the songs, they handed you the songs. Here's the songs you're going to sing. You really never even got a real opportunity
Interesting.
to be a creator. So if you went far enough on the show where you got known and people knew who you were, like you made it into the top 5, let's say, so you were seen by a
Right.
lot of people, and then you were no longer on the show. Well, now you have a constituency that you can work to with no restrictions. And
Yes.
maybe some other record company will sign you because you're popular, and then you
Yep.
have some leverage, and now you can write your own music and you develop on your own, right?
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
so you use it as a platform, but you're not kind of stuck with the deal that they give you, you know?
Yep. No, I hear you because I think of like if I go to the United States one, you have Adam Lambert who didn't win, and I mean he spectacularly
There's a
went.
bunch. There's a
Yeah.
bunch. But,
Carrie Underwood.
well, Carrie won, and so did Kelly Clarkson. right? But
Yep.
those are the only two that anybody talks about that won, and
Right.
the show's been going for 20 something years,
Unbelievable to me.
right? So now you realize, oh, it's a television show,
There you go. You
right?
you labeled it. So
It's a
when
it's a TV show, right? It's like, you being an author, you're really successful as an independent author if you if they had a show like that for authors, right?
yes.
You know, or something like that. And the deal was really restrictive, right? Where you got
Yep.
like a really shitty royalty, like a lot of book deals
For
are,
sure. Yep.
and they only spend a little bit of money and to get you out there, and that was it. Like you'd
Yep.
sell no books, and no one would ever read your books. No one would even know,
It
right?
it it's very tough in that sense as far as where those things fit. As you know, right? The distribution
Right.
deals are like really kind of crazy. That's why I've kind of come back to with the different artists that you work with. I mean, obviously, Tragically Hip is the iconic one that kind of comes
Hmm.
to mind. But as the manager,
Hmm.
would you get into the creative world with them as well? Like as far as how albums got configured, song order, like you wouldn't
No,
write songs obviously, but
I, 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 I always let them make the decisions, right, on the art,
right,
and I would give my opinion on what I thought. So, and that still happens to this day. We're putting a greatest hits thing together, or we're putting a live album together, or something like that. And it's like, someone comes up with a sequence, and we're like, hey, maybe that song will be better here, and this one will be better here. Oh, good idea. You know, but basically, I let the artist do the art, and
right,
it's kind of like you let me do my thing, which is exploit your art for you and the
right,
best way I know how without exploiting you, right?
right, right.
Um, and you do the art, and that's
It
always
just
been my thing. I'm not a packager. I'm not like wear these clothes, dress like this, work with these dancers. That's not my world. It's not what I do. You know,
interesting,
but I will have
interesting,
opinions on a lot of those different things.
which
Um,
is valuable,
yeah, because that's what they're looking for.
right?
But at the end of the day, it's still their final decision. You know.
So I'm thinking because with this new social media world we have, we've got these things popping up, and recently one popped up with Dan Aykroyd introducing them on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, in '95. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember that night?
Oh yeah. Sure. It
Was
was
that like,
my mom's birthday. We flew her to New York for that. You know.
no way? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That'd have
Yeah.
been so she was really thrilled.
Yeah. Well, and she's from New York, so for her it was like a big deal, right? So yeah, we brought her to New York so she could come to the show, and she came to the after party and got to. She was like, I guess, and then how old would she have been in '95? She would have been 63. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she'd
So
have been just super thrilled.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a great night. Dan says it in the doc. He says it was a glorious night. It was. You know.
It was spectacular. And you know what, to me, even I'll say reminiscing on it, when Gordon, like bless his soul, came out and said the Tragically Hip right in the song, I
Where
thought,
he missed the lyric. There's a piece right now that's floating around the internet telling the story on how and why he missed the lyric.
but
Right.
to me, it
It was
was like,
by accident. It wasn't like some people thought, wow, that was really smart. It's like he tells the story, and we all knew, that it was completely unintentional.
wow. But, you know, in this entertainment world that we live, like they
Hmm.
say that even the movies, some of the best scenes are not in the script, right? And like
Right.
to me, that was how how appropriate. It's kind of like I go back to you're talking about writers, Stephen King bringing himself into his stories.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
when have you ever heard a band do like that? in on national television. Like, what a cool way to recognize it, no?
Yeah, I guess, you know, but that wasn't the intention,
No,
you know?
that's the exact accidental parts that happen that kind of, to me,
Right.
can really make a whole difference in a lifetime. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, uh, it's funny because in the doc, the Trailer Park Boys say, "Wasn't that cool that he did that?" And when you see this interview with him, he talks about um, he talks about that his nephew, who very rarely asks him anything, said, "When you go on Saturday Night Live, my birthday's that day. Can
Oh,
you like give me a nod or something?" So Gord says, "I'll do this. I'll put up because you're going to be 11, and
oh,
I'll do this, right?"
okay, yes.
And so the whole time he's thinking about, I got to do this for my nephew. I got to do this for my nephew. And then he hears Dan say the Tragically Hip. And so because his mind was somewhere else, he just repeated what Dan said.
Oh,
So if you watch it, you see he does this off the
yes,
top. And that's his signal to his nephew that, hey, you're
I'm
11.
watching you. I think that's a very cool thing to have done. It
Yeah.
was when it was announced that Gordon was sick. Did you knew all about what was going on?
Um, yeah. Yeah. Well, I knew then. I knew there was something up because I
Okay,
wasn't working with the band at the time.
okay.
So I knew there was something up. And
Because
then, yeah,
it was so strange to me because you have two things happening very close together, right? Because we have Neil Peart of Rush going through the same thing.
right. I think the following year, right?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was kind of like, here you've got two iconic lyricists,
Who
and
were really good friends, who were
oh, were
friends.
they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like they hung out, but they were friends for sure.
Well, in many ways, it's like I think of you remember Pi Dubois?
Of course. Of course. I Dubois was the lyricist for Max Webster.
Right on. And I always thought that in talking with you right now, there's a neat blend between those three individuals as well, as far as how they wrote.
Yeah. Well, when I was growing up, Rush and Max Webster,
Yes,
I was into prog. I was into progressive rock,
right.
and Rush and Max Webster were the closest Canadian band, and maybe Saga was kind of
Yes,
proggy,
yes,
and
yep.
there was another band. I forget what they were called. They were kind of prog. We had like 4 or 5 prog bands, Canadian prog bands, because you know, yes, Genesis, all of those bands,
Yes,
and
yes.
the early '70s, early to mid '70s were really, and they all came out of that era,
Because
right? So
when you say that, I'm thinking of UFO, and I'm
UFO
thinking
wasn't Canadian though.
and Triumph,
Triumph
but
wasn't a rock band.
a
They were
prog band.
a straight ahead rock band. Yeah, yeah,
And when you say those things, those are like kind of there's another band that I'm thinking of, though. It's not UFO. Used to play Nash the Slash, I think used to play with them. And I
yeah.
kind of
No,
remember.
no, that's the band that Nash the Slash used to play with. That's the one I can't think of.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's I can even think of FM.
FM. There was it. There
That's the
you
band.
go. Right? Yeah, it was FM. Right.
And
I
I
think
just I just thought of,
they had that song called "Hold Fast" or something like
oh,
that.
it's a beautiful song.
Right.
Yes.
So
No.
that was the band, right?
So now I can't escape now without asking you, how did you work with Terry Brown? because he was very connected with the Rush sound too at
So
that time.
this was after Rush. I don't know. I forget. I think Terry had produced New Regime for me.
Okay,
And
okay,
then when I started working with producers in the year after I split from the Hip, I was managing some producers, which is how I started working with Mo Burke from The Pursuit of Happiness. And
right,
working with Mo as a producer, and just, you know, because of that, I ended up taking over all the stuff with the band. And
okay,
at that point, I was working with a bunch of different producers, and I still have a bunch of producers to this day. And Terry, just him and I, we met somewhere. Like, we had met, we knew each other, but we, met at something, and he was like, "Hey, maybe we should talk." And so there was a while that I worked with him.
okay,
Um, but some of those. It's a funny thing with producers. Some of those relationships can continue. Like, I work with Russell Broom,
okay.
who is Jan Arden's guy, and he also co-writes with Jan and produces her records and produces a lot of other records. And he scored her TV show. And I work with Bo Berg. And
Yeah.
then some of them end up, they're more engineers, so they end up just taking work and they don't really need me. So,
Okay, okay.
I don't kind of push it. But I literally, I just signed. It hasn't. We haven't even really told anybody yet. But I just signed Steve Berlin as a producer client, and Steve produced Phantom Power for the Hip, and produced Music at Work, and
Oh,
produced
wow.
S Dummy's first record, and produced Los Lobos. And the guy, he's won 4 Grammys as a producer, and he's won 8 in total,
Oh,
because he's 4 as a member of Los Lobos. So
wow.
yeah,
That's kind of cool.
yeah. So I just signed him this week. Well,
Oh, that's real news.
last week, but yeah, but we're just putting his bio and kind of taking another run at his website and everything else right now. But
You also work with Big Rec.
yeah, so Alan and I discovered Big Rec really early, and we put up the money to make that first record, and then we had a bidding war, and it ended up going to Atlantic Records, and we had a guy that worked with us that we he became the manager. That he worked within our company, and he became the manager.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
but I kind of oversaw the original signing, the making of the record, and then we oversaw the marketing, and the rollout and everything for the first Big Rec record. And then by the time the second one came out, that guy that worked with us split, and he took the band with him. So,
Oh, yeah.
which happens in this biz. So,
No, no doubt. Well, this is why when you were saying earlier on too, the relationship part of it, like
mhm,
to me, it's a big part of the creative world is that relationship and that connection.
right.
Because without like we need each other whether we like it or not, and we're not supposed to be alone. And I think it really connects. Not that everybody connects with each other, but for that creative element to come together is an important one. So it's
Hmm.
interesting that you kind of related to that. Anyway, I was going to say this has been a wonderful chat today. I'm so glad that you kind of came on. I'm trying to watch with our time with here, and the latest news that you just put out to us, kind of a cool way. But with all the different kind of clients you've worked with over the years, Jake, and we touched on this a little bit about being unemployable, but is there something that, like, what you've seen over the years that, in closing, you would kind of say as far as a talent person? And the reason why I'm saying this is I went out the other night and I saw this. I've had her on the podcast. Her name's Laura Altamuller, and she's like a concert pianist.
Right.
Kind of unbelievable, actually, because when I see this, sometimes it just throws me. And she performed. They're out of Western Ontario's School of Music, and she performed with this Noelle Carey, and she's a soprano, a mezzo soprano.
Hmm.
And I'm listening, and I'm kind of going like, they're unbelievably talented. Like they sang in this I'll call this hall that just she made the walls shake. I'm using them as an example here because when you're looking for people today, what you're looking to work with, in closing, is there things that you could throw out to people that, like, if you're a creative, what is it that you think needs to happen?
Well, it's interesting you ask me that, because the people used to ask me that when I was on Idol. What made you want to, like, put this person through to the next round? Like, what
Right.
was, and 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 the same thing that happens to you happens to me, which is, when you get that involuntary feeling that of something special that
Okay.
that you didn't have before you saw them,
Ah, yep.
right? So if it makes you feel something, because at the end of the day, music's emotional,
Totally.
right? And
Yep.
so if that thing can make you feel that way, there's a good chance it can make other people feel that way, right?
And
And
that's your
kind of that's the litmus test, and that's kind of what you're always looking for.
okay.
For me, I'm always looking for that. Am I feeling different than I did before I saw them? And that could also be, I feel like shit, so this isn't very good, And I don't mean it made me feel like shit. It just didn't move me. So when
Right,
you
right,
people say that expression, that moved me.
right.
Yeah, because it's an involuntary response to what you just were exposed to. And that can happen with a movie, and that
Yes.
can
Yep.
happen with, I've seen plays where
Yes.
I'm, like, completely moved by someone's performance. There was
Okay.
somebody, I once saw a play, and there was this woman was in the play, and I was so blown away by it that I reached out to her on Facebook, just, stranger, saying, "Hey, I saw you in this play last night. You blew my mind." And she just happened to know who I was from TV,
Oh,
and,
okay.
and we became friends. But I ended up seeing the play 5 times.
Oh, wow.
And I would bring all these other people to see it. Like, you got to see this person. And everyone felt the same way as me afterwards. Um,
Interesting.
and so, it's always about, does it move you? Does it make
Yeah.
you feel something you didn't feel before? Is there an involuntary response that you can't put your finger on?
Yep. Yep. There's
Right.
an
And
intuition.
it's not even an intuition, because you actually feel it.
It's
It's not,
deeper than that. I got it.
yeah,
It's like a gut
it's
feel
not a
thing.
thought. In fact, all thought is taken away.
Oh man, that's
Right.
a great way of
all, all
describing it.
all thought is taken away. It's a feel. Right. And that's what music does. Music is mood and feel based. Like, if you're feeling a certain way, you put on it, you want to listen to a certain kind of music. You're feeling another way, you want to put on a different
Yep.
kind of
Yep.
music.
Yep. Yep.
And music can set the mood for, however you want to be, whether it's a romantic thing or a celebratory thing or whatever it is. You would use
Yep.
music to kind of fit the mood that you're in. And I think that's what you're looking for is, is it going to make me feel something? And if it's going to make me feel something, is it going to make others feel something?
Yeah, it's a contagious though. That's a cool way of looking at it.
So
Very, very, very cool. Jake, I can't thank you enough for having this conversation, joining Better Than Not, and much appreciate it. I'm going to say goodbye. If you could stay on for a minute, just to make sure we get this all downloaded. But I thank all of you. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Jake Gold tell us a little bit about his background and his world, because it is fascinating. You're
thank
you're 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 kind of a Canadian kind of what's the treasure? That's what I'm going to say it. There's a lot of
you're
Canadians.
you're way too for Canadian treasure for someone born in the US, but I'm a dual citizen. So, but thanks for having me, Doug.
Right on. And like I said, if you
You.
could stay on for just a minute, we'll go. Bye for now. Thank you.
Are we on? Good. Welcome to the Better Than Not podcast.
Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But when we at least do something, we know it's almost always better than not.